Welcome back to my Scream review series, and today I'm going to be talking about the film in the franchise that seems kind of divisive for some reason. In Scream 2, Sidney Prescott is trying to get used to college life, despite constant reminders of the Woodsboro murders. But when a new killer emerges, she and her friends are once again thrown into a dangerous game. As a film buff, there's a scene that always stands out to me with Scream 2, and it's a scene that provides a good setup for what I'm about to talk about. Where you have all these teens in this classroom, and they're having a debate about sequels. And there's people talking about how sequels suck, and the original is always better. And it's kind of ironic for this film because I think in certain ways, Scream 2 surpasses the original. It's something hard. Like, horror sequels are often not very good. But this film, it breaks that trend. And it's a sequel that I compare a lot with the first one, and it's at times hard for me to decide which one I prefer. Scream 2 does what any good sequel does in giving us what we expect from these movies, but also expanding the world. And the opening is fantastic. One of my favorite aspects of this franchise is introduced, and that is the Stab series, which is the film within a film for the Scream series. These films that are retelling the Woodsboro killings and at some points recreate scenes from the original film. And it just goes so over the top meta that I absolutely love it. This film also expands on the characters, and of course you get to see more of Sidney Prescott. And at this point, she really wants to be distant from people. She feels that if she has people in her life, she's just going to endanger them because Ghostface is going to come after her. This film is great at showing it how events like those that took place at the end of Scream what kind of effect that would have on a person. And now as the movie Stab is coming out, Sydney is getting prank calls from people pretending that they're the killer, and then you have a scene like where she's rehearsing that play and she just starts seeing Ghostface everywhere. But just seeing everything stack up against this character, it's just hard not to root for her, not to want her to have a better life. And that's what it seems like she could have with her new boyfriend, and their romance is actually pretty satisfying. Like I mentioned in the first Scream how I was kind of neutral with her relationship with Billy Loomis. And though this is a Scream film and everyone can be a suspect and her boyfriend is a candidate for Ghostface, I found myself more invested in this type of dynamic. Especially like the scene at school where this guy just busts out singing I Think I Love You. And it's a scene that starts out awkward, but then it gets pretty cute. But with that, I also have to talk about the other romantic relationship in this movie, that between Dewey and Gale. Two characters that are at odds. Because Dewey feels that Gale doesn't really care about people, that she's always putting people in danger, and that it doesn't matter if she has to hurt someone to get forward in her career. But the sequel allows her to grow as a person. And throughout the film, she questions herself more, and it even gets to a scene where she has to watch through a glass window at Dewey getting stabbed. And over the course of the film, she learns to care more, become less self-absorbed. But also touching more on the romance side of things, you still get more of that adorable side to these characters. Like when they're at this campus and they both bend down to pick something up and they bump their heads, and then that leads to them kissing. And it was very sweet, but also very cheesy. And that's just what works about these characters, and this sequel understands that. And there's even a scene where Randy touches on how horror sequels always feel that they have to go bigger, have more kills, more carnage candy.
Number one, the body count is always bigger. Number two, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. More blood, more gore. Carnage candy.
And it's just refreshing to see that this film is actually bigger for the characters. And speaking of the characters, we actually get to see Cotton Weary in person. This character that was just introduced to us in a news broadcast in the first film and was never brought up again. But what's really interesting about this character is that he's actually kind of creepy. Like the scene in the library where he's trying to get Sydney to do an interview with him. And just the way that he's getting like really close to her and almost kind of pinning her down against a wall. It's just very uncomfortable to watch. And even though you know that this guy is innocent, you know about Billy Loomis and everything that happened in the first film, and you know he didn't actually kill Sydney's mother, you can understand why he was accused of the crime. He just has this sense about him that he could be a serial killer, which I thought was something really cool to do with this character. But yes, this film is still horror, and Wes Craven is still great at directing sequences. Like one at a sorority house that is like the comp for the opening scene in the first Scream with Drew Barrymore walking around her house. And it's kind of a similar setup. And it's not quite on the level of that original scene from Scream, but it's still very well shot. But what always adds to a scene like this is Ghostface's iconic voice as this person is navigating the house, trying to figure out what's going on. There's a great scene in a park where Dewey, Gale, and Randy are together, and suddenly Randy gets a call and they have to look around this wide area seeing if the killer is nearby. And just in general, this film has bigger sequences than the first film, but this film also has some smaller scenes of tension, like after a car crash where Sydney and her friend have to climb over an unconscious Ghostface to escape, or when Gail is in this film place and it almost becomes like a maze where she's going against walls and you see Ghostface coming up behind her, also going into different sections of this building. Scenes that are directed so well by Wes Craven that, to me, they're just classic Scream sequences. But also this film gives more of the meta aspect that Scream is known for, like with the sequel discussion, that whenever that scene happens, I become a giddy nerd. I like having those kinds of debates with people, which also get this callback to the first film where in that one, Sydney was saying how if they ever cast someone to play her in a movie, it would be Tori Spelling. And you actually see that in this film. You get a scene where Tori Spelling and Luke Wilson play Sydney and Billy Loomis. And the scene is just so ridiculous because it's these adults pretending to be high schoolers, especially with Luke Wilson's hair. What is that? Even when you get to the end where you get the killer's motivation, how he's gonna blame the movies for him killing all these people. And it's more of Wes Craven just commenting on film, and he's poking fun at how a lot of people respond to these types of movies. Like, should we really blame the artwork for crimes that people commit? Or are those people just taking advantage of the fact that they saw that artwork as kind of like excusing their behavior? It's still a relevant discussion to have today. Now, this film isn't perfect. Of course, this film going bigger, there's more stuff happening and there's higher stakes, and the pacing at times because of this, it kind of drags as you go back and forth between plot threads. But in the end, when I think about the reasons why I love the Scream franchise, I almost always think about this film. I guess it's just one of those films that I'll never really understand why people don't like it, because at the end of the day, I think this film is just as classic, or at times even a bit more than the first film. Not only that, but it's one of the best, if not the best, horror sequels of all time. I'm going to give Scream 2 an A. Stay tuned very soon for my review of Scream 3. And if you didn't notice, I do put playlists for the different franchises that I review. I currently have one for Scream. The only other one in there is my review for the original Scream. Check that out if you haven't. And I'll see you guys next time.